Anthropologist and historian who ended up working in the Pentagon and in tech, and long and crooked road that is, and now happily ensconced at Unity 3D for all of 3 weeks, working on their social impact creators team, working with people who are looking to use our technology to do real social good in the world.
What was it that got you interested in anthropology? I get history, but anthropology, I always need to ask.
Yeah. So for me, anthropology is just the study of the intersection of technology and culture. That's the part that I'm really interested in.
Oh.
So how, if you watch a movie like The Gods Must Be Crazy, one of the lessons it teaches is that unless a culture is really prepared to accept a new technology, they'll cross a burning desert to give it back to you. Right. And so I'm always interested in those moments. History interested me in those moments when technology leaped past our ability to make sense of it, to really grasp its potential. And anthropology just kind of dug deeper into that, into how the cultural context surrounds those moments as well.
I had thought, and I wasn't ever able to say this to educators, that I don't think people should take history in high school. They should be forced to take it when they're 30 years old, after they've seen the world a little bit.
How about from high school till 30? That would work.
Yeah. It'll take a while. Now explain a little bit. We've had some folks from Unity on talking about technology, and today we're really talking about culture. What does it mean to have someone who's in charge of social impact on a company that's working on future tech?
Yeah, so full disclaimer, I'm still figuring that out. But one of the reasons that attracted me to Unity is they have an entire social impact division, wing, if you will, that works with future creators, people focused on social impact, works with educators, works with all kinds of people who are building and using the Unity technology to create social good and social justice in the world. And that's I remember telling one of the people that I interviewed with that basically right now I'm a program manager, and you can program manage stuff all day that doesn't move the needle, or you can go program manage something that has the potential to actually change humans' lives for the better. And that's extremely attractive.
Now, when we first met back in the day, you were the first person who was in charge of training a workforce. I think it was at the Defense Acquisition University. It was like all the purchasing agents for the Defense Department. And what I really appreciated was the very humanistic approach to doing the training. I had not ever seen that before. I mean, I'm involved in training, but not in that level. Tell me about that.
I mean, that's the anthropologist in me, right? Is that it all comes down to the humans at the end of the pipe. And so, one of my favorite examples is from Defense Acquisition University days, which is on Fort Belvoir. Fort Belvoir also hosts the largest single military hospital east of the Mississippi. And it's about 2 miles from I-95, which I had to travel north to get home. So if you came to me with a great training opportunity, but it happened at 3:30 in the afternoon, which is when shift change happens at the hospital, you just made my ride go from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours.
Oh.
Right? So always considering that context of the human, how could you not? Right? I mean, we're not here for Taylor anymore, right? I think that's one of the problems that we can talk about today, is that we have systems in place that don't account for the humans in the equation. And so that's one of the things that I always pushed when I was at DAU. My task was to look at innovative technology and emerging technology that we could use, like intro networks. And I think one of the things that attracted me to intro networks at the time is because it really clearly, and in a visual sense, there can't be any mistake, put a human in the middle of it, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't see why we would do anything else.
So with your background with working with such big tech companies and companies that you don't necessarily think of people first when you think of them, or the names I read off in the beginning, were you, and I think that's why you're a disruptor and why you're here on the show. What kinds of things did you do in those large companies that were disruptive?
Well, so I think my disruption, so I'll disagree with one point. I think the orgs that I have worked for, including Department of Defense and including Amazon, have in their missions being people-centric, right? I mean,
Oh, okay.
when we talk in one of the things you can look at is the way people can shortcut a conversation to get to a real heart of the matter. And when we were talking in the Pentagon, the phrase was the warfighter, right? It all came back. The bottom line is the man or woman who's going in harm's way, and how is what we're doing going to either help them or hinder them, right? So very human-centric. And at Amazon, the human in the equation is the customer. That we always want to be. That's how the flywheel gets driven, is by focusing on customer needs and figuring out ways to meet them better and faster and at greater scale. So I think the disruption that I have brought has been in the way we approach those things, right? And in the technology that we deploy, like intranetworks, or I remember being an early adopter of Groove, because Groove got us to that level of collaboration, but it was one of the first ones to meet DoD security considerations, so we could actually use it, right? So I think looking out, being on that edge, being, the kid who runs in the room with something shiny and goes, we should do this, and then figuring out the requirements for it. I think that's where I was the disruptor, was pushing people to think differently about the tools we had available.
There's the guy who shows you the cool app on the phone, or the cool gadget, or the cool, to your point, shiny thing. I was like talking to the guy who gave it to him or her, right?
No, I think, but it does bring a challenge, which is, I think the reason I would come running in with something is because I'm making those leaps in my head of where I see this going, right? And the things I can see it apply for. And I haven't always done the best job at explaining those leaps to people when I come running in with a thing. And that's one thing that I've tried to get better at, is now when I come running in with it, going, okay, and here's how I see this happening, right? And here's how we start where we are and get to where we're going. I think that's why some of the mechanisms we had at Amazon were so helpful in terms of being future looking like that, where you could cast out 2 years and describe the vision of what you saw happening.
I think that's one of the primary appeals of TED, for me, going to TED and now, hosting TEDx and doing the salon conversations, is the lateral associations that we make, right? So it's, someone may not actually, who's watching today, may not have a specific interest in this, but there's going to be something you say that laterally associates with something else. So they go, oh, and to your point, what you've learned, because there's not a lot of lateral thinking that goes on, or orthogonal thinking that goes on, is if you can help through storytelling to connect the dots for them and help them see the picture that you already see, that helps bring them along with you. Is that
absolutely
it?
Yeah, absolutely. And Amazon was actually a great proving ground for learning that mechanic. It's because at Amazon, we don't use anything like PowerPoint. We write everything down, or we did when I was there. Using a narrative structure, having to be text-based, forces you to tell a story. You can't go from slide to slide to slide. It has to be a coherent story. You can't have a break in the middle. And so that was a great training ground.
So you've worked at really big organizations, and I'm thinking of the people who are listening to this right now that may not be working in a huge organization, a smaller organization. What kind of counsel do you have to them? And I'm thinking specifically around innovation agendas and future thinking a bit, and being able to kind of work into the future.
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things right now in terms of innovation, especially for smaller companies and smaller groups, is that never before have those groups had as equal an access to information as the large companies, right? That never before has democratization of information access has never been greater. And so the only thing limiting you now is that willingness to engage the different, right? To explore, to figure out new ways, to not accept that it's always been done this way. And that's, kind of one of the pieces that I think drove us into this conversation, is that I think there's some foundational things that we've just been accepting, and we need to gather up the courage or the willingness, the political will, if you will, to move past them to get to some different places. But for small groups and small companies, absolutely, if you're in a big company, that's probably who you fear the most, is that, you know, somebody is going to make that leap. And you've also never been able to scale as quickly as you can now. You know, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud allow you to engage heavy metal in an instant, like you couldn't do before if you weren't IBM. And so the information has never been more democratized, and the ability to scale has never been easier to get a hold of. So really, it just boils down to your willingness to engage that different.
So what are the foundational changes? And maybe explain what you mean by that, just to set the context, and then maybe give us 3 examples of things that we might be paying attention to.
So just to be clear, I'm my undergrad was in management, and I'm the guy who just squeaked through accounting classes, right? But I think the burr in the saddle, the stone in the shoe that lately has just set me going, has been this idea that when we keep hearing people say that, you know, people are our greatest assets in this company, and it kept triggering me that that's not true. It's absolutely not true. If you look on a P&L, people are your greatest cost. I mean, they are accounted for as a cost. And so, you know, I've been in learning and development for a long time, and one of the things we've always fought is trying to get a seat at the table. So this is one example. And you know, you can never figure out, like, does leadership just not get the importance of training? Do they not understand how learning can be a differentiator between a competitive differentiator? And then, you know, it took until probably about a year ago that it really hit me that the reason you don't get a seat at the table is because you represent a cost center, not an asset. And what do you do to cost? You don't invest in cost, you minimize cost.
Yeah.
And you go back to this whole Taylor idea of that stemmed from that, you know, we've heard that old adage that investing training in an employee is just getting them ready for their next job. Well, that might be, but what that reveals is a failure on your part to successfully engage the employee, right? And so the foundational stuff that I talk about is the generally accepted accounting principles, and how we still use double entry bookkeeping that might be somewhere on the order of 1,500 years old to account for the people in our organizations. Like AWS has a chief technology officer named Werner Vogels. Great, brilliant mind, also happens to be a pretty good DJ. But if you look at the AWS balance sheet, you don't find Werner as an asset. You find him as a cost. His salary and his total compensation is a cost. And it's up to kind of the individual heroic effort of leaders to recognize that, yes, there's value in it. We're going to bear that cost. But that, to me, doesn't, I don't sit well with that. I don't sit well with individual heroic effort, allowing us the mechanisms to maintain what really is our assets. Like Amazon could lose all of its, I mean, during the pandemic, we've lost all of our, you know, no one's using our buildings, you know, tiny percentages, but it's still the same company. So but if you look on the balance sheet, it's the buildings and the computers that are referenced there and not the people. And until we change how we view that, until we change it at a financial and accounting level, then we're going to continually push the rock uphill as to why we're investing in costs.
Wow.
So I didn't mean to go all soapbox there,
that was you know, going against GAO seems you know, pretty tough. Are there others out there that you've found who are on the same thread as this?
Sure. There's, you know, you can find articles about how some companies are starting to try to do this. But again, we need a generalized recognition of this as a problem. We need a generalized movement to address this, to change how we account for things. We need new accounting principles for, so I remember when I was working as a defense contractor, I was sitting right next to our chief of staff's office, and this kid walked out of his office, and I knew the chief of staff really well. And he walks out and he goes, "Mark, just come here for a second." I said, "What's up?" And he goes, "That kid who just walked out of here is 19 years old, and he wants me to pay him the same as I paid a retired colonel that we just hired." And I said, "Well, why does he want that?" And he goes, "Well, he said something about he's MCSE certified, and he runs our email servers. And I was like, can the colonel run our email servers? Said, no. He said, well, then we kind of need the kid, don't we? But there's no way to account for that difference of you just hired an MCSE certified engineer versus a retired Army colonel, right? There's no way to put a proper valuation on the colonel and his contacts and his network, or the kid's technical knowledge, right? So we don't have appropriate ways, accurate ways to value the people in our organization. So please stop telling me that people are our biggest assets, because you don't know. And they aren't represented that way on the balance sheet.
What would kind of wrap this idea up? Mm-hmm. What would, let's say we live in a world where we are accounting for them on the balance sheet the way you're suggesting. How would business be different?
Great question. Maybe HR looks a lot more like stock managers. The employees are valued at different levels. The more you invest in them, the more valuable they become to the organization, the more you want to keep them. So maybe they look like money market managers, right? And in the best way, in a way that actually makes truth of this statement about human capital, right? Because that's not a true statement now, right? And maybe they become capital managers, and they look at allocating capital that way. I don't want to put people into pure financial terms, but if we're looking at changing the financial underpinnings of how we regard people,
you kind of are,
yeah.
right?
Well,
right. If you're looking at this cost, it's like I'm weighing this.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah, so, I want to put them in a financial light that's fair and that recognizes people's value to the organization, right?
It feels like we've stumbled into a future episode of Black Mirror,
but in a good way.
In a good way, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to read one that's kind of like this, Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom by Cory Doctorow, where your ability to access things is based on your social capital. It's an incredible read and introduces some new economic terms that we won't go into here, but like woofing. So that's a term to look up.
Mark, I love all these great ideas. Thanks for sharing them with us.
Of course, Mark. Anytime.